The morning of June 3, 1890, broke over Coldwater, Alabama, with a heat that clung to the skin and carried the scent of wet earth and wood smoke. The town was barely stirring when the church bell rang 7 slow times, a ritual that usually meant joy or sorrow. But that morning, the ring felt wrong, offbeat, hesitant, as if unsure what it was calling for. Down by the dirt road that curved toward the cotton fields, a boy named Eli Turner paused his chores and looked toward St. Matthew's Church. The white steeple shimmered against the sky, but something in the air made the hairs on his arms stand up. The bell tolled again, louder now, and Eli thought he saw a thin column of smoke rising behind the chapel roof. He dropped his bucket, his breath catching in his throat. By the time he reached the church, a crowd had begun to gather. Men with half-buttoned shirts, women in aprons and headscarves, their faces slick with sweat and worry. The air smelled of ashes. There, beside the side door of the rectory, a blackened wooden chair lay half crumbled. And standing a few feet away was Reverend Silas Moore, his white collar streaked with soot, hands trembling around a worn Bible. "Stay back," he warned, voice hoarse but commanding. "The Lord has judged this place. It's not for you to look upon what he's burned." No one moved. The congregation of Coldwater was used to Silas's passionate words, but this time they carried no hope, only exhaustion. His eyes were glassy, almost fevered. When Sheriff Amos Carter stepped forward, Silas turned slowly to him, lips pale as clay. "What happened here, Reverend?" the sheriff asked. Silas's jaw tightened. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then he lifted the Bible and pressed it against his chest. "A demon," he whispered. "A serpent among us." The house of God had to be cleansed. The sheriff looked past him to the remains of the chair, and there, just visible in the ashes, was the outline of something that made his stomach twist. The faint, unmistakable contour of a human arm. That was the morning Coldwater stopped being quiet. In the days that followed, rumors spread faster than the summer flies. Some said Reverend Moore had gone mad after the death of his wife 2 winters prior. Others swore he'd been hearing voices while he prayed. But Silas himself never offered more than scripture. When questioned, he quoted verses about purification, about souls steeped in sin, about fire being God's truest form of mercy. The people of Coldwater didn't know what to believe. They only knew one thing: something terrible had happened inside that rectory. Silas Moore had not always been a haunted man. Born in 1848 to a family of poor farmers, he'd grown up believing labor and faith were the twin pillars of salvation. As a young preacher, he traveled from settlement to settlement, building a reputation for sermons that could wring tears from stone-hearted men. He was charismatic, too charismatic, some said. His eyes had that glint of conviction that frightened as much as it inspired. "He speaks like he's seen heaven himself," an old woman once whispered. Or maybe hell. By 1875, he had married Clara Weston, the daughter of a storekeeper, and together they came to Coldwater to rebuild the old St. Matthew's Church. People said their love was pure, almost saintly. But behind closed doors, the Reverend's faith began to darken. Clara's health worsened, their child stillborn, and Silas spent long nights alone in the chapel, his voice echoing through the empty pews. He started keeping journals, pages upon pages of scripture rewritten, rearranged, and annotated with his own thoughts. Words like temptation, redemption, and blood began to appear again and again. When Clara died in 1888, neighbors expected the preacher to crumble. Instead, he grew colder, more determined, claiming God had revealed a purpose to him, a trial that would test his obedience. He preached about a sin festering within the town, unseen but spreading like rot. The fire of repentance, he said, must come to Coldwater before grace can rise. That's why, when the ashes were found, some were quick to see divine retribution, but others saw madness. Sheriff Carter ordered an inquest, though quietly. Coldwater wasn't the kind of town that liked its name in state newspapers, and men of faith were given careful protection. Yet the sheriff had been disturbed by what he'd seen around the rectory: the burned chair, the faint smell of oil, and a rope half hidden beneath the ashes. He'd seen hangings before. He knew restraint marks when he saw them. That night, as the cicadas screamed across the fields, Carter returned to question the Reverend once more. Silas sat alone on the chapel steps, Bible still in his grip, a kerosene lamp beside him. The flickering light painted his face in gold and shadow. "Reverend," the sheriff said quietly, "I need to know who was in that chair." Silas didn't look up. "You wouldn't understand." "Try me." For a long moment, there was only the sound of insects and the low creak of the wooden floor beneath Silas's boots. Then softly he spoke. "He confessed to me 3 nights ago. A man who had done unspeakable harm. He begged for absolution, but his repentance, it was false. I saw it in his eyes. The Lord spoke through me, told me what had to be done." "What man?" Silas turned toward him then, and for a flicker of a second, the sheriff thought he saw tears on the preacher's face. "The kind who hides his evil in plain sight," Silas murmured. "The kind this town protects." He stood, closing the Bible gently, almost reverently. "You'll find the truth soon enough, Sheriff. But it won't bring you peace." Carter left the church uneasy, his mind filled with questions that refused to settle. Who had Silas burned? What sin could justify such an act? And why did the preacher's words carry the ring of both madness and prophecy? In the following days, the church remained closed. The townsfolk avoided its gates, though every night a faint light burned behind its windows, a small, unwavering glow that flickered through the glass like a living thing. Some swore they heard chanting after midnight. Others claimed they saw the Reverend walking through the graveyard behind the chapel, muttering to himself, stopping before each headstone as if taking attendance of the dead. Eli Turner, the boy who'd first seen the smoke, said he passed by the church 2 nights after the fire. Through a crack in the shutter, he glimpsed the Reverend kneeling before the altar, shirt soaked through with sweat. But what froze Eli's breath wasn't the prayer. It was the shape of something beside him on the floor. A small wooden box, wrapped in a torn piece of linen, and faintly glowing from within, as if embers still hid inside. And above the whisper of the cicadas, Eli swore he heard Silas's voice, soft and trembling, repeating the same line over and over again. "Salvation demands sacrifice." By the week's end, the sheriff received a letter, written in meticulous handwriting and sealed with a black wax cross. It was from the Reverend himself. It read simply, "The cleansing has begun." Sheriff Amos Carter sat at his desk long after sundown, the letter from Reverend Silas more placed neatly before him like a coiled snake. The wax seal had cracked cleanly when he broke it, leaving the faint scent of tallow and smoke on his fingertips. The message was short, just that single sentence, "The cleansing has begun." But it carried the weight of something larger, something Carter couldn't yet name. He leaned back, rubbing the bridge of his nose, listening to the rhythmic chorus of crickets beyond the open window. The air outside was thick and warm, pressing against him like a fever he couldn't shake. Coldwater was a small town, built on faith, cotton, and silence. People worked from sunrise to sunset, and the rest they left to God. Sheriff Carter didn't have the luxury of blind faith. He'd seen too much of what people could do when they believed themselves chosen. And Silas Moore, respected, eloquent, mournful Silas, looked more like a man touched by obsession than divinity. Carter turned the letter over and noticed faint black smudges along the edge, as if the Reverend had sealed it with hands that had recently touched ash. He wanted to believe it was only dirt from the rectory fire, but that nagging instinct, the one honed from years walking the line between truth and rumor, told him it wasn't. The creak of the door interrupted his thoughts. Deputy Harold Finch, a younger man with a clean-shaven jaw and the weary look of someone who'd seen too little and too much all at once, stepped inside, holding his hat. "Evenin', Sheriff. Folks down at the mill are uneasy about the Reverend. Say their wives don't want to bring the children to church no more." Carter grunted. "Can't blame 'em. Man burns something or someone and tells us it's divine justice. People tend to start asking questions." Finch hesitated, then lowered his voice. "You think it's true what they're saying? That he killed someone?" "I think," Carter replied, tapping the letter, "he's not done yet." They locked eyes in the yellow lamplight, a heavy stillness between them. The deputy finally nodded. What do you want me to do? Get word to Reverend Moore that I'll be paying him a formal visit tomorrow afternoon. And Harold, Carter paused, his voice low and deliberate. If anyone else goes missing, day or night, you ride straight to me. No delays. Finch tipped his hat and left, the door clicking softly behind him. Carter sat there a while longer, his thoughts circling the same questions. What did Silas mean by cleansing? Who was he purging, and from what sin? Somewhere deep down, the sheriff wondered if the Reverend truly believed he was serving God, or if he just found his name useful to mask something darker. The next day brought a sweltering sun that seemed to coat the whole town in a film of sweat. Dust rose from wagon wheels like smoke, and dogs panted on porches with their tongues hanging low. Carter rode up the dirt path to St. Matthew's just past noon. The church stood silent, boarded windows gleaming in the light, the cross on its steeple casting a long, thin shadow across the cemetery. He dismounted, boots grinding on gravel, when he noticed the sound, a low hum, rhythmic, almost musical. It seemed to come from inside the church. He pushed the door open, the hinges squealing. The air inside was thick with the smell of wax and something else, something metallic, faintly sweet. Blood. Silas Moore stood by the altar, head bowed, one hand resting over his chest. Rows of candles flickered around him, their flames trembling in the heat. Sheriff, the Reverend said softly, without turning. You've come. I said I would, Carter answered. Silas turned, face gaunt, eyes heavy with sleeplessness. There's more darkness here than you know. It runs deep in this town, in the hearts of those who smile in church and lie in their prayers. Carter nodded toward the altar. You talking about someone in particular? I speak only the truth, Silas replied. You remember Mr. Avery? The banker. He confessed to me, Silas said, voice nearly breaking. Confessed to ruining widows, to lying to the poor, to stealing what little they had left. He begged me to intercede for his soul. But he wasn't sorry, Sheriff. He just wanted to be clean without bleeding. Carter's brow furrowed. And what did you do with that confession? Silas smiled faintly, but there was no warmth in it. I did what God asked of me. Something inside Carter tightened. He stepped closer. What do you mean, Reverend? You'll see, Silas murmured. Carter's gaze drifted to the altar. And that's when he saw it. A small wooden box, the same one Eli had mentioned, now resting on a white cloth. It was closed with a brass clasp shaped like a cross. The faint smell of burnt oil rose from it. What's in the box? Carter asked. The wages of sin, Silas whispered. The sheriff felt his throat tighten. He moved forward, one hand resting on the grip of his revolver. I'll be the judge of that. He reached for the clasp, but Silas's hand shot out, gripping his wrist with surprising strength. Don't, the Reverend hissed. You're not ready. Carter pulled free, jaw set. You don't decide what I'm ready for. He flipped the clasp and lifted the lid. Inside lay a mound of charred wood, and among it, something unmistakably human. A silver ring, its band warped by flame. Good Lord, Carter breathed. Silas fell to his knees, eyes shining with tears. He was corrupt. I sent him to judgment. Carter stared down at him, torn between disbelief and horror. You confessin', then? You killed Jeb Avery. I freed him, Silas answered. And soon others will follow. Coldwater will be clean again. Carter stepped back, heart pounding. You're talking about murder, Reverend. Ain't no cleansing in that. You'll hang for what you've done. Silas's expression softened strangely, like a man saddened for a friend who could not yet see the truth. You think hanging matters to a man who's already burning? Carter snapped the box shut. You're coming with me. But Silas didn't move. He simply gazed at the sheriff, his voice low and calm. There's more you don't see. More he told me. About you. Carter froze. What's that supposed to mean? Silas tilted his head. Ask yourself, Sheriff, where does mercy end and complicity begin? You've turned your eyes away more than once. You've let the rot grow. Before Carter could respond, the Reverend stood, brushing ash from his sleeves. Arrest me if you must. But it won't stop what's already begun. Outside, the heat shimmered above the cemetery, the air heavy with the scent of pine and decay. As they walked toward town, the people of Coldwater watched from porches and sidewalks. Whispers followed them like shadows. And behind the locked doors of St. Matthew's, the candles still burned, one by one flickering out until only a single flame remained beside the blood-stained cloth on the altar. That night, as Carter locked Silas Moore in the holding cell, the preacher sat quietly, eyes closed, lips moving in soundless prayer. When the sheriff turned to leave, Silas spoke again, his voice just above a whisper. "The cleansing always starts with the willing," he said, "but it never ends with them." Carter stared through the bars, the words echoing long after he'd walked away. Outside, the church bell rang once, though no one had pulled its rope. By dawn the next morning, the sky over Coldwater had turned a dusky gray, streaked with long ribbons of smoke drifting across the hills. The air carried a sharpness that made every breath taste like burnt pine. Sheriff Carter hadn't slept. He sat on the edge of his cot in his small back office, replaying the Reverend's words over and over. The cleansing always starts with the willing, but it never ends with them. It looped in his head like a song he couldn't silence. Down the hall, Reverend Silas Moore remained still inside the narrow cell. He hadn't asked for water or food, hadn't spoken since the night before. The morning light spilled through the barred window, painting his face in stripes of gold and shadow. When Carter approached, Silas looked up slowly, eyes calm, too calm for a man facing the gallows. "You been praying?" Carter asked. Silas's voice was quiet, almost kind. "Always. Even for you, Sheriff. I don't need your prayers." "Everyone does," Silas said with a faint smile. "But not everyone admits it." Carter felt that familiar chill again, the same one he'd felt by the fire pit behind the church. "You killed a man, Reverend. You burned him like fire could save him." Silas clasped his hands. "Fire doesn't save men, Sheriff. It reveals them." A silence hung heavy in the space between them. Outside, footsteps echoed through the hallway. Deputy Finch appeared, hat in hand, his face pale. "Sheriff," he said carefully, "we've got trouble. There's smoke down by the Avery place." Carter stiffened. "The banker's property? Or what's left of it?" They rode hard toward the edge of town, where the Avery house sat behind a rusted gate and a line of dying magnolias. By the time they arrived, most of the roof had already collapsed. The fire had eaten through everything, timbers, walls, memories. The smell of oil was thick on the wind. A handful of townsfolk stood scattered at the edge of the dirt path, faces tense, whispering. "What started it?" Carter demanded. An old man pointed with a trembling hand. "A wagon came through before sunrise. Didn't see who was driving. Just smoke after that." Carter dismounted, motioning to Finch. "See if anyone's alive." They stepped over blackened beams and glowing embers, pushing deeper into the wreckage. The air was suffocating, thick and hot enough to sting their eyes. Carter's boot kicked something buried in ash, a tin box, half melted. Inside it, among the remnants of coin and paper, lay another folded letter sealed with black wax. He slipped it open with the edge of his knife. The writing was the same meticulous script as before. "You cannot save what refuses to be cleansed. The shadow spreads. The next shall be revealed." Carter read it twice, jaw tightening, then handed it to Finch. "Tell me he didn't write this." Finch scanned it and paled. "It's his hand, all right." The sheriff turned toward the town square, anger rising in his chest. "He's been locked up since last night. Someone's helping him." They rode back fast, dust trailing behind them like smoke. When they reached the jailhouse, Carter's got twisted at the sight before him. The cell door was wide open. The lock had been snapped clean, metal twisted like wire. Inside on the wooden bench lay Silas's Bible, pages torn and rearranged into a small cross. The Reverend was gone. For the first time in years, Amos Carter felt fear in a way he couldn't name. Not just fear for the town, but fear for what he might discover about it. Deputy Finch searched the office. Windows intact, doors been broken from inside. "Sheriff, I swear I locked it." Carter's voice dropped to a near growl. He had help. Someone with a key, or someone who believes like he does. They stood in silence, listening to the faint peal of the distant church bell, a single note carried on the wind. Then, faintly, another sound. Footsteps outside, hurried and uneven. Eli Turner burst through the doorway, face flushed, breath ragged. "Sheriff, at the river. You gotta come. There's something you need to see." They followed him down the dusty path to the edge of Coldwater Creek, where the water ran slow and copper-colored beneath the morning sun. At the shallows stood something tied upright to an old fence post, a crude wooden cross draped in soaked cloth. Carter squinted, stepping closer. The cloth shifted in the breeze, revealing what was beneath, a lifeless shape, burned at the edges, skin blistered and gray. The victim's eyes were open, staring blankly toward the church steeple on the horizon. Finch swallowed hard. "Good Lord." Carter crouched low, his expression hardening. Around the base of the cross, someone had etched words into the mud with a stick. Judgment. Underneath, faintly carved, were initials, J.W. Jonas Whitmore. Carter muttered. The mill foreman. Silas had preached against Whitmore before, calling him a merchant of sin for exploiting the workers and cheating widows. Carter had brushed it off as zealotry. Now, two men Silas had publicly condemned were dead, and both had burned. There was no denying it now. Someone was acting on the Reverend's sermons. Whether Silas himself or a follower, the line between devotion and violence had disappeared. By afternoon, word had swept the town like wildfire. People whispered outside stores, pews, and porches, suspicion spreading faster than smoke. Half blamed Silas, half blamed the sheriff for letting him go. Fear changed the air. It made neighbors watch neighbors, and prayers turn into accusations. As the sun dipped low, Carter sat outside his office, hat in hand, staring down the empty road leading toward the hills. He kept asking himself when all this had started. Not the murders, the rot beneath them. The silence after Clara Moore's death. The way people said nothing when Silas started growing strange. Maybe the cleansing he spoke of had never been about burning at all. Maybe it was a reflection of the town itself, a mirror to all its unspoken sins. When night fell, a storm began to build on the horizon, thunder grumbling across the plains like the voice of something ancient. Finch came to the doorway, holding what looked like a torn scrap of parchment. "Eli found this outside the church," he said. "Looks like part of the Reverend's journal." Carter unfolded it carefully. The ink was smeared but legible. "Those who stand idle in the face of wickedness are the same as those who commit it," it read. "And if the shepherd cannot cleanse his flock, he must become the flame." Carter closed his eyes. "He's coming back to finish it." Finch lowered his gaze. "What do? We get there first." They saddled their horses as lightning flickered across the horizon, illuminating the church steeple in the distance like a blade of white fire. The wind carried the low moan of thunder and the smell of rain. Carter's thoughts churned. This wasn't just about stopping Silas Moore anymore. It was about confronting everything Coldwater had chosen to ignore. As they rode through the darkening fields, the first heavy drops began to fall, hissing against the dust. Somewhere beyond the river, a faint light glowed behind the shutters of St. Matthew's once more. And within that flicker, unseen by the riders approaching, a figure moved slowly down the aisle toward the altar, whispering a single prayer beneath the roar of the coming storm. The cleansing is not yet complete. The rain had stopped by dawn, but the sky over Coldwater was still bruised with smoke. The field steamed where the storm had passed, leaving behind a silence that felt wrong, too thick, too expectant, the kind that follows after screams. St. Matthew's Church was now just a ruin of charcloth and ribs of black timber, the air sharp with the smell of wet ashes. Sheriff Amos Carter stood at the edge of the wreckage with his hat in hand, his clothes stiff with soot. He hadn't slept. Neither had Deputy Finch, who lingered a few steps behind, clutching a canteen and staring blankly into the wreck of what had once been the town's heart. They'd spent half the night searching the embers, but what they found didn't sit right in Carter's mind. 2 bodies burned beyond recognition, one near the altar, unmistakably Lila Johnson, the girl, and another beneath a fallen beam, still clutching scorched ribbons of cloth. Everyone said it was Reverend Silas Moore. Carter wasn't so sure. He knelt beside the second body, eyes narrowing at the clasped hands. The bones of the fingers had fused together in the heat, but one detail cut through the ruin: a simple iron ring. Not the Reverend's. Silas had always worn a silver cross ring, plain but distinct. This one was etched differently, a single mark carved into the band, a shape like a snake swallowing its own tail. Carter looked up. "Finch," he said low, "this ain't him." The deputy frowned. "What do you mean?" "Folks saw him inside. You dragged him out. The beam must have fallen when he broke free." "Maybe," Carter muttered, "but that ring, he never wore it. And look here." He pointed to the chest of the body, where a deep wound cut clean through the ribs. "That's a bullet hole. Caliber small, but fresh before the fire." Finch swallowed, throat dry. "Then who?" Carter stood, jaw tightening. "Someone wanted us to think more died here." The revelation spread through town by midday. People whispered it over laundry lines in the stores at the mill. Half the population believed the devil himself had walked out of the fire. Preachers from nearby counties rode in to see the ruins, quoting verses about plagues and false prophets. Women crossed themselves when Carter passed by, as if proximity to him might draw curse or ruin. By evening, the sheriff's office had become a refuge of noise. Men arguing, papers flapping, voices begging for calm. But Carter only listened to one thing: Finch's update. "We found tracks near the churchyard," the deputy said. "Boot prints. One set heavy, the other smaller. Looked like they were headed east, toward the quarry." Carter nodded slowly. "East. Yeah. But it's not just that." Finch paused. "We also found this stuck in the fence post." He opened his palm. Inside lay a small, black button carved from bone. Carter's heart soured. He knew that button well. "That's from Silas's coat," he muttered. Finch hesitated. "Then maybe he ain't dead." Carter didn't reply. He grabbed his rifle, holstered his revolver, and buttoned his damn coat. "Get your horse ready. We ride before sunset." They took the narrow road out toward the quarry, where the earth broke open into cliffs of red clay and limestone. The trail was half swallowed by weeds and mud, but the tracks were fresh, pressed deep. The sheriff rode silently, gaze fixed ahead, wind flapping his coat. In his mind, he kept hearing Silas's voice, calm, steady, merciless. "A shepherd who guards wolves is no shepherd at all." As they climbed higher, the wind carried another scent. Smoke again, light and foreign, mixed with oil and candle wax. The trail ended at the mouth of an abandoned mine shaft carved into the hill. The entrance was boarded up years ago after an accident that buried 2 miners alive. The boards were broken now, pulled apart by hand. Carter motioned to Finch to hold back, then stepped inside. The air turned damp, the walls slick with mineral sweat. His boots crunched ash scattered over the stone floor. Someone had burned something down here recently. A lantern flickered deeper within, resting atop a crate beside a makeshift altar, a rough wooden plank, its surface covered in charcoal crosses and scripture scrawled in candle wax. On the floor before it, half buried in dirt, lay a freshly dug grave. No coffin, only shadows. Above it, the name Lila Johnson was carved into the wall. Then came the sound of movement, slow footsteps scraping against gravel. Carter turned, rifle raised. "Silas." The Reverend stepped from the darkness, pale under the lamplight, coat torn, eyes hollow but alive. His beard was singed, his hands blistered, yet his composure was almost serene. "Sheriff," he said quietly, "I prayed you'd come." Carter tightened his grip on the gun. "You fake your death?" Silas smiled faintly. "No, my death was real. The man who burned was the one who betrayed me, the one who carried out the first killing." Finch stepped forward behind Carter. "What are you talking about?" "There were 2 of us," Silas said. "At first I only preached. He made my words flesh. I let it happen. I let him believe it was holy work." "You're saying there's another killer out there?" Carter asked. "There was," Silas answered. "He came to me after the first fire. He thought he was saving the town. But when doubt entered his heart, he turned on me. He begged forgiveness, and I gave in fire." His face trembled. But the cleansing isn't done. The sin runs deeper, deeper than me, deeper than you think. What sin? Carter demanded. Silas met his eyes. The one you buried. For an instant, the air seemed to stop. The Reverend stepped closer, pointing a shaking hand toward the grave behind him. She wasn't the first, Sheriff. You remember the others, don't you? The girls who went missing years before? The ones the mill hands swore had run away. Carter didn't answer, his face stone. Silas's voice dropped to a whisper. You knew. You looked the other way every single time. Lightning cracked outside, flashing through the cave's mouth. Finch turned to his superior, bewildered. Sheriff, what's he talking about? Carter raised his rifle again. You're out of your mind, Reverend. Am I? Silas stepped aside, revealing another grave behind the first, smaller, older, with names crudely scratched into the rock. Anna, Rose, Clara. Finch's jaw fell. Claremore? Your wife. Silas nodded, tears glistening. She found out about the mill, about the girls, about the money. God didn't curse her with illness. She was silenced. The Reverend's eyes blazed with something between pain and triumph. And now the truth burns, same as sin does. Carter's hands shook slightly on the rifle. The sound of rain built again outside, echoing through the hollow earth. You think killing everyone who ever lied to you's gonna make this right? He asked quietly. Silas's smile faded. You mistake this, Sheriff. I'm not finishing God's work anymore. He looked down at the fresh grave. I'm asking him to finish mine. Before Carter could react, Silas sank to his knees, pulling from beneath his coat a matchstick and a small tin of oil. Silas. The Reverend struck the match. Flame bloomed. Smoke swirled. The mine walls lit up like confession itself. And then everything exploded into fire. The explosion tore through the hill with a deafening roar, throwing dirt and flame into the night sky. Sheriff Amos Carter was hurled backward, slammed against the rocks outside the mine entrance, as the air filled with choking dust and shards of burning pine. For a moment, everything disappeared into ringing silence. Then came the low rumble of collapsing stone, echoing through the valley like thunder swallowed by the earth. When Carter's vision cleared, the mouth of the mine was gone. All that remained was a smoking crater where the Reverend had stood, a wound torn straight into the hillside. Deputy Finch lay a few yards away, limp but breathing. Carter crawled over, coughing black soot, shaking his deputy awake. Harold, he shouted. Breathe, damn it. Finch gasped, eyes darting wildly. Where's more? Carter turned toward the rubble. Gone. Rain began to fall again, hissing as it struck the hot stones, mixing with ash and mud until the slope looked like bleeding earth. The sheriff's coat was torn, his hands cracked and burned, but he pushed himself upright, trembling. The mine had swallowed Silas whole. It should have been over. It should have felt like victory. Instead, it felt like a burial. Finch coughed, spitting up dirt. Hey, he said something about the mill girls. He wasn't lying, was he? Carter stared into the dark. Let's just get back, he muttered. They rode in silence through the dawn. The horizon bled pale light over the fields, revealing the twisted skeleton of St. Matthew's still smoldering in the distance. Coldwater lay quiet, every window closed, every curtain drawn. By the time they reached the jailhouse, the air smelled cleaner, but the feeling in Carter's chest had turned heavier than ever. He slumped into his chair, wiping grime from his eyes. Finch stood near the doorway, unsure whether to speak. Sheriff, he said finally, if what he said's true. Carter cut him off sharply. He's dead, Harold. And that's all anyone's gonna know. Finch hesitated. What about the graves? The names? Lila? If there's more to this. There ain't, Carter interrupted, his voice like iron. You'll write it up same as it happened. Reverend went mad, killed those men, tried to kill himself, died in the fire. We put an end to it. That's the story. Finch didn't answer. The steady rhythm of the rain outside filled the silence between them. Carter leaned back, rubbing the scar across his wrist, left by Silas's grip days before. He could still hear the preacher's last words twisting through the smoke. Asterisk, I'm not finishing God's work anymore. I'm asking him to finish mine, asterisk. What if he did? Carter thought. At noon, as the church bell was lowered from the ruins and the men began salvaging whatever timber remained, a few townsfolk came to the sheriff's office. They wanted reassurance, wanted to believe Coldwater's curse had burned away with Silas Moore. Carter gave them calm words, a steady voice, the kind that carried conviction whether or not it was true. Yet that afternoon, while Finch went to tend the horses, Carter found himself drawn back to the evidence box sitting on the corner of his desk. Inside lay the Reverend's letters, the button, and the charred iron ring from the body they'd misidentified. He turned the ring over in his fingers, tracing the Ouroboros etched into its band, the serpent devouring its own tail, and wondered if Silas had been mocking him or warning him all along. That evening, the storm finally cleared. The town emerged cautiously, sweeping the ash from porches, nailing boards over broken doors. The people talked about rebuilding a new church on higher ground, somewhere where fire couldn't touch them again. Carter listened without comment. Faith, he realized, was just another word for forgetting. Near midnight, a sudden knock rattled the front door of the office. Carter looked up from his paperwork, hand instinctively finding the revolver at his side. Finch opened the door to reveal Eli Turner, the boy who'd first witnessed the original blaze. His face was pale, his hands shaking as he held out an oil-stained envelope. "Sir," Eli stammered, "I found this. By the riverbank, not far from where they pulled that second body from the church. It's addressed to you." Carter took the envelope carefully. The handwriting was clean, deliberate, unmistakably Silas Moore's. He dismissed the boy with a nod, waited until the door closed, then broke the seal. Inside was a single sheet covered in neat black ink. "Sheriff Carter," it read, "if you are reading this, then my confession still breathes even if I do not. I have sinned by taking lives, yet you have sinned worse by letting others take them under your silence. Coldwater thrives on forgetting, but the Lord never forgets. When the rains come again, dig beneath the north wall of the mill. That is where her voice still cries. Do what is right, not what is safe." Carter's grip tightened. The next line was written in larger, heavier strokes. "Do not bury this, Amos." He folded the letter, sliding it back into the envelope, and sat motionless for several minutes. Outside, thunder rumbled faintly along the horizon. Finch noticed the look on his face and frowned. "Everything all right, Sheriff?" Carter met his gaze. "Yeah," he said finally. "Just another ghost." When Finch left for the night, Carter remained alone, staring at the iron ring now resting on his desk beside the sealed letter. The lamp cast its light across both until their shadows stretched into one another, the Ouroboros shimmering faintly in the glow. An hour later, the sheriff saddled his horse and rode north alone. The moon hung low, silver over the river, guiding him toward the old mill. The air smelled of cedar and smoke, the fields still damp under the hooves. He stopped beside the crumbling stone wall, just where the letter had said, and dismounted. The ground there was uneven, a patch the color of dried blood amid the grass. Carter removed his gloves, knelt, and began to dig. The soil was soft at first, then turned thick and cold. His hands moved slower the deeper he went until his fingers scraped something smooth beneath the dirt. Wood, old and damp. He cleared the soil away, breath catching in his throat as he uncovered a small wooden box, half-rotted by time. Inside lay a bundle of bones bound with ribbon. Around the wrist was a bracelet engraved with initials. C.M. Clara Moore. Carter sat back, the wind rising around him. He stared at the box, the truth now heavy and undeniable in his hands. The Reverend hadn't lied. The townsman had silenced his wife. And Carter, back then a deputy, still green, still desperate for favor, had signed the reports that buried the truth. Now the graves were open. He covered the box again, not because he wanted to hide it, but because he didn't know what else to do. Then, as he stood in the moonlight, he heard it, faint, distant at first, then unmistakable, the church bell. But St. Matthew's no longer had a bell. The sound came from the south, low and wavering, as if carried by the wind across the damp fields. Sheriff Amos Carter froze beside the buried box, his blood turning to ice. The tone wasn't steady. It rose, faltered, then rang again, softer this time, like someone testing the bell rope for the first time in years. But that was impossible. St. Matthew's bell had melted in the fire. He had seen it with his own eyes. He turned toward town, scanning the horizon. The faint glow of lanterns dotted the distance, flickering between dark shapes of roofs and cotton fields. Then came another sound. Hoofbeats. Fast. Urgent. Carter drew his revolver. Who's there? A figure appeared on horseback, galloping hard through the mist. It was Deputy Finch, shirt half torn, eyes wild. "Sheriff," he shouted between breaths. "It ain't over. Sir, you need to come now." Carter grabbed his reins, snapping his horse into motion. "Talk." Finch gasped for air as they rode side by side back toward town. They heard it, too. The bell. But it wasn't from a church. It's coming from the graveyard. The big one on the hill. The horses thundered down the dirt road as the moon broke through the clouds, pale light sliding over the tombstones that crowned the hill above the burned church ruins. When they reached the gate, half the town had gathered there already, men clutching lanterns and rifles, women holding their children close. Every face was turned toward the ridge where the old iron bell tower used to stand before it collapsed years ago. Only now, in its place, stood something new. A cross, tall, heavy, built from the scorched beams of St. Matthew's. And hanging from it by frayed rope, glinting in the lamplight, was the missing church bell. It swayed slowly back and forth, striking a single mournful note each time the wind shifted. Beneath it, nailed to the wooden post, was a sheet of paper. Carter pushed through the crowd, boots crushing wet grass. He tore the note down and held it under his lantern's glow. "Confession demands witness. The flames revealed the rotten. Now dig where judgment sleeps." No signature, just an imprint of a cross drawn in soot. Finch's voice trembled. "Sheriff, who the hell wrote that?" Carter's jaw clenched. He folded the paper and stuffed it into his coat. "Doesn't matter. We'll find out." He ordered the crowd to disperse, but few listened. People whispered about omens, ghosts, and judgment days. One old woman shouted that Silas Moore had risen from the grave to finish what he started. Another swore she'd seen a man walking by the cemetery at dusk, carrying a lantern. By the time Carter reached the base of a new cross, lightning flashed far off behind the clouds. The air smelled of iron and rain again. "Get ropes," he told Finch quietly. "We're tucking that bell down." Two men stepped forward, both mill workers, Reed Holloway and Thomas Garner, volunteers when the sheriff said the word. But as Reed climbed the post, one boot against the blackened wood, something snapped in his footing. He slipped, his hand brushing the bell, and a hollow sound echoed as something fell out from inside it, striking the ground with a dull thud. Finch bent down first and froze. "Sheriff, it's a hand." The lantern light revealed it, a severed human hand, charred at the wrist, curled as if gripping something that was no longer there. The crowd screamed. Someone dropped a lantern. Within seconds, panic tore through them, shouts rising, people stumbling backward over the graves. Carter bellowed for calm, but the fear was alive now, uncontrollable. He knelt beside the hand. The skin, what was left of it, bore the faint outline of a ring. An iron ring etched with a serpent circle. Carter's throat went dry. "Get everyone out of here," he shouted to Finch. The deputy obeyed, herding the people away from the graves. When the noise finally died down, Carter stood alone beneath the swaying bell. Wind shifted through the trees, setting it moving again, with a sound that felt less like metal and more like breath. He should have felt relief, confirmation that whoever Silas claimed as his other had died after all. But the thought didn't settle right. If the ring's owner was dead, who had dragged the bell from the ruins? Who had left the letter? The sheriff turned his eyes toward the gravestones scattered across the hilltop, their surfaces slick with rain. His lantern caught something carved freshly into one of them, new lines cutting through the moss. He moved closer. The name carved there stopped him cold. A Moss Carter. Below it, one word, accounting. A chill tightened his spine. He stumbled back, heart pounding. Someone had been here, chiseling those letters while the town slept. Someone who wanted him to know they'd been watching. Finch came running up again, breathing hard. "Sheriff, you better come down to Main Street. The mill's on fire." Carter spun, lantern flickering. "What?" "Biggest blaze I ever seen. Started near the north wall, exactly where that letter said." Carter's blood surged. He sprinted down the hill, mud flying from his boots, Finch behind him. As they neared the center of town, orange light glowed against the low clouds. The mill roared like a furnace, its windows alive with flame. Workers shouted, forming bucket lines to the river, but the fire spread too fast, leaping from window to roof. Carter seized one of the workers. "Anyone inside?" "Couldn't tell," the man yelled. "Saw someone go in just before it lit up. Looked like a preacher's coat." The word struck like a blow. Through the haze of smoke, a tall figure moved past a broken window, the silhouette unmistakable. Broad shoulders, slow steps, a lamp swinging in one hand. "Silas." Carter shouted into the roar, voice cracking. But the figure didn't stop. It turned briefly toward the sheriff, then vanished into the blaze. The building groaned. Sparks swarmed the night. Finch dragged Carter back as the walls collapsed inward with a sound like thunder splitting the earth. The river steamed, embers swirling through the air like fireflies. When it was done, there was nothing left but black ruin and the steady patter of rain beginning again. Carter stood staring into the glow, his reflection twisted in the burning water. Finch whispered, "You saw him, didn't you?" Carter didn't answer. Downstream, through the drifting embers, something floated. A burned scrap of parchment, edges curling as it sank. On it were 4 words scorched into the surface. "Fire reveals. Water judges." By sunrise, Coldwater no longer looked like the quiet town it once had been. The mill had burned through the night, leaving only a hollow shell of iron beams and scorched brick. Smoke curled lazily into the pale morning light, carrying the sharp smell of oil and wet ash. The people stood in clusters outside what used to be their livelihood, faces hollow, their silence heavier than morning. Sheriff Amos Carter watched from the ridge above the river, his coat still damp from rain. His horse shifted uneasily beside him as the wind stirred the smoke. He hadn't slept. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the figure in the fire, the black coat, the steady steps, the face that might have been Reverend Silas Moore or something that wore his faith like a mask. Deputy Finch arrived just after dawn, his boots caked in mud. "We found a body," he said quietly, "by the waterline. Burned bad, but tall. Could be him." Carter didn't look away from the smoke. "And the ring?" Finch hesitated. "Gone. Finger too." Carter let the silence stretch. "Get a crew to gather whatever's left. No one touches anything till I say." Finch nodded but lingered. "You think he planned all this?" The sheriff exhaled slowly. "Every part." As the hours dragged on, the town tried to make sense of what had happened. Some called it divine retribution. Others whispered that Silas Moore had called down the devil himself. But Carter knew the truth wasn't buried in the ashes. It was buried beneath them. By noon, he rode back to the ruins of St. Matthew's alone. The hills shimmered with heat where the ground still smoldered. Birds avoided the place. Even the wind seemed hesitant to pass through what was left of the churchyard. He dismounted beside the broken fence and walked to the spot where the pulpit had once stood. The air reeked faintly of smoke and iron. Kneeling, Carter brushed aside a layer of soot and uncovered a half-melted cross, its edges warped but still recognizable. He turned it in his hand, feeling the heat scars on the metal, and thought of Silas's words. Asterisk, "Fire doesn't save men. It reveals them." Asterisk. Maybe that's what the Reverend had been trying to do all along. Not purge sin, but drag it into the light. For a long time, Carter stood there, motionless, until the sound of a wagon reached his ears from the road. He turned as Finch approached again, waving for him. "Sheriff." Something else washed up. They rode back to the riverbank, where the mill's debris floated in slow circles. A group of men stood knee-deep in the water, pointing toward a tangle of branches and reeds near the bend. Caught there was a wooden crate, half-crushed, stamped with the faint logo of Coldwater Mill. Carter waded in and pried it open. Inside were ledgers wrapped in oilcloth, records detailing years of transactions, payrolls, and bribes. Payments made to foremen, pastors, deputies. His name appeared twice. Finch saw it too. "What the hell is this?" "Proof," Carter said, voice hollow. Of all the fires that Silas had set, this was the one that burned longest, the truth itself, rising now from the river like a ghost refusing burial. The Reverend hadn't needed to survive to finish his cleansing. He'd already handed Carter the spark. The sheriff closed the box and stepped back onto the shore, dripping. "Harold," he said quietly, "lock those papers away. No one touches them till I decide." Finch studied him. "You're gonna bury it, ain't you?" Carter met his eyes. "I'm gonna end it." That night, as the town gathered to pray beside the ruined church, Carter stood apart from the crowd. Their hymns rose weakly into the air, cracking like embers. He didn't join them. He simply watched the flames from their torches flicker against the ruins where Silas had died, or tried to. Later, he walked back to his office under the weight of the stars. He poured himself a glass of whiskey, but the burn in his throat brought no comfort. On the desk before him lay the Reverend's final letter, the Ouroboros ring beside it, the serpent still devouring its own tail in endless penance. He picked up the ring, rolling it between his fingers. It was no longer just Silas's symbol. Somewhere inside it, Carter saw himself, a man who'd spent decades circling the same lies, enforcing the law not to protect the innocent, but to keep the guilty untouched. When the clock struck midnight, he made his choice. He took the ledgers, the ring, and the letter to the river. The air was cold, the moon casting a silver path across the water. He set the box on the bank, opened it once more, and struck a match. The papers caught quickly, flames licking upward, reflecting in his eyes like flickers of judgment. He watched until nothing remained but ash. Then, without hesitation, he tossed the ring into the water. It sank without a sound. He sat there for a long time after the fire died, until the horizon began to pale again. For the first time in years, the river was calm. At dawn, Finch found him still sitting by the bank. "Town's quiet," the deputy said softly. "They think it's finally over." Carter looked out across the still water. Maybe for them. He rose, brushing ash from his hands, and began the slow walk back toward town. As they reached the road, the old church bell sounded once, distant, faint, carried somehow through the morning air. Finch froze. "You hear that?" Carter didn't turn. "Yeah." "Must be the wind," Finch said, trying to sound certain. But the sheriff kept walking. "Maybe," he murmured. Behind them, the sound faded into silence, leaving only the steady whisper of the river and the first light of a new day breaking over Coldwater. The town would rebuild, the mills would reopen, and the sermons would return. But under its soil, under the ashes and the water, something else remained. Truth, heavy and unyielding, waiting for someone brave or foolish enough to dig again. And until that day came, the echo of the bell would linger, soft, distant, and endless, calling Coldwater to remember.
Every family hides secrets, some so dark they should never see the light of day. Here, we open the doors to those shadowed pasts, uncovering hidden crimes, silent pacts, and stories that echo like ghosts through the halls of memory. If you've made it this far, it means you also carry that forbidden curiosity. So don't hesitate. Subscribe to the channel now, turn on the bell, and follow our next revelations. Because every day, new secrets emerge, and only those who dare to face the truth remain to hear them.